Hello, this is a tutorial on how to use the AutoMap function of Tiled Map Editor to auto-generate walls for your 2D game. First, I'll show you the end result of what this tutorial will do. Basically, use the AutoMap function here or press A, and it will create walls based on your higher ground being the light brown and your lower ground being the dark brown. So we can easily change this and use AutoMap again, and it will create the walls for you. So this tutorial assumes you know a little bit about tiled and the basics at least of what the AutoMap function does and how it works. And if you don't know anything about the AutoMap function, I'm going to link a video by Stefan Veller in the comments here. You can check that out before continuing. Alright, here we have an overview of what we'll be doing. We'll have a tiled map called test map, which is the actual map that we'll be using the AutoMap function. It's going to have one layer called ground. We have a text file called rules that contains the names of the rules we'll be using, which are separate tiled map files. So for this example, we're going to have walls rule and corners rule. And this text file is simply going to be linking the main tiled map with the rules. The walls rule TMX is used for auto-generating the vertical and horizontal walls, and it has 3 layers. Regions, which is the section, the area that it's going to analyze. Input ground, which is the actual tiles within that section that's going to trigger the rule. And then output wall is the actual wall tiles that it's going to output. And similarly, the corners rule is going to have 3 layers: regions, input ground, and output wall, but it'll be creating the corner wall tiles. Alright, so let's begin. All we need to start is the test tile set image, which will be available for download in the comments section here. This has the walls on it, and the low ground is dark brown, high ground is light brown, and I'll explain what these are in just a little bit. So let's go to tiled, let's create a new map that is 32 by 32 pixels, and let's go ahead and save that as test map. Let's import the tile set, test tile set, 32 by 32. So here it is. So what we're going to be doing for this example is using light brown as the high ground, and we're going to be carving out the low ground from the high ground. That's how our rules are going to work. So it doesn't matter which tile we use for the high ground, but in order to trigger the rules, we're going to need to use this particular tile right here for triggering the rules as the low ground. So we'll start off with just making a square, and this is going to be called ground. And it's important that these names line up with the rules that we're going to create later. So save this, and now we're going to need to create the rules text file. So this is just a text file called rules. Basically, when you use this AutoMap option right here, it searches for rules.txt inside the same folder and runs whatever is in it, which is going to be our walls rule.tmx. So we're going to have both the walls rule and the corners rule, but we'll start off with just walls rule. Alright, so we've got that created. Now let's create the actual walls rule file here. Walls rule. Okay, so in here we're going to have 3 layers. We're going to have regions, input, ground. Keep in mind, remember this is what we called the tile set in the main test map. It's called ground. And output walls. This is going to output to a new tile set called walls in test map when we end up running the rules. So regions, this is basically the kind of like the size of a section of what will be analyzed. So kind of go ahead and show you it, and then it'll make more sense what's going on here. So let's go ahead and import our tile set. This is going to be the tile we use just to indicate the region. So this actually doesn't do anything, and it won't show up anywhere except here in our rules. So let's do the vertical wall. Let's do the top walls to start, and it'll make more sense once you take a peek at it. Okay, so this is the region that it's going to be analyzing, something this size. Now within that region, what ground are we going to have? It's going to search for our carved out ground tile that would be in these spots right here. So basically, if within this region it sees these tiles here, the carved out ground, then it's going to auto-generate this as the wall. So bam, we have our first rule made. So let's go ahead and save this. Okay, so let's test this one out. So we're going to go to our test map, and we're going to go map, AutoMap. And voila. Okay, so it technically worked. You can see that it created this layer called walls. Put it on there. Remember, that's because we called the output walls. The input was ground. So the good news is it worked. The bad news is look how repetitious it is. It doesn't look that great. So what we're going to do is go ahead and undo that on this page. We're going to go back to our walls rule. And we're going to add 2 more pieces similar to this. So let's take a look at our regions. Use our trigger tile that we're using. And we're going to make one that is 2 wide and one that is 4 wide. Now what's going to happen here is it's going to use the 4 wide when it can, and then if there isn't enough room for it, it's going to use the 2 wide, and if there isn't enough room for that, it's going to use the 1 wide. That way, it'll be at least repeating a wall that is 4 tiles wide instead of the single tile wide. So it should look a good bit better. Now remember, our regions area is where it's going to be searching for. It's just the area. So basically within this area, we're going to be looking for the input ground, which is our carved tile, our ground tile. So for this 2 wide, it's going to look for this much ground and nothing above it. And for our 4 wide, it's going to look for this much carved out ground and nothing above it. So if you want to kind of relate the two together, here we're looking at our map. It's going to be looking at, for the 4 wide, it's going to be looking for this, where it has the dark brown, the carved out ground, but then above it, it doesn't have the carved out ground. So let's go back to here. Alright, so input ground, we got that. Now our output walls. So let's see, for the 2 wide, we'll use this. This is the one we'll use for 4 wide. So let's just review here what we got. Regions, the input ground, and the walls it's going to output. So let's see what happens. Save that. Come back here. See what happens when we do the AutoMap. Nothing happened this time. That's because we don't have our walls showing. So let's click that back. Okay, so we can see it's kind of working, but not quite. So let's go ahead and undo what I just did. Okay, so now we just have the ground. Back to stage 1. And run the AutoMap. So we can see it looks like it used the 4 wide here once, but it's still using the singles here. So what's the dealio with that? Well, that is because we have to add a special property to our tiles, our rules map, and that is called no overlapping rules. So that's going to keep it from any of these guys overlapping on top of each other. So if we set that guy to true, hopefully when we save this and run it, it'll look a little bit better. So let's undo, back to just our ground that we carved out initially. And there we go. So we've got, decent sized, doesn't look too repetitious, at least compared to before. So let's go ahead and, mess around with this a little bit. Let's make it a little bit wider. And we can go map, AutoMap, or instead we can just press A. So let's just press A. There we go. Cool. Okay, so that's working. So now we're going to have to add the side walls, the right and left walls and the bottom walls. Hopefully I'll be able to do this and just fast forward through this part because it's essentially the same thing as what we just did here, but for the other walls. So let's go ahead and add these. So we'll start off with our regions. Okay, so now we've got our walls filled in here. Let's go ahead and save this. Let's take a look at what we got. Regions, separately the input ground, separately the output walls. Here they are together. Save it. Let's see what happens. Let's undo this. We're back to just ground. There we go. So we've got all of our main horizontal and vertical walls. Now we just need to do the corners. So let's go ahead and undo that back to normal. Save that. Done with this rule. So let's do a new rule. Save this guy as corners. Cool. It's 50 by 50. Size. New tile set. Test tile set. 32 by 32 pixel tiles. And let's take a look at this. First things first, let's go to our rules file. Go ahead and add corners rule.txt. Okay, so let me take a peek at this. Okay, so our regions for this are a little bit different. Now with the corners we have both the inner corners like this, where it's curving inward, and we've got the outer corners here. So we're going to end up having 8 total. So let's start with one of these. Let's see what kind we're going to do. Alright, we're going to do this inner corner first. Okay, so zoom in a little bit. And this one is going to be 6 by 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Alright, so this is the area that it's going to be searching in. What is it going to look for within this area? It's going to be looking for just the corner being carved out. So imagine our entire square was like this, this whole thing filled in. It's going to look for where it just has the corner here and no other carved out ground around it. So there's the corner. And what is it going to output? It's going to output, make sure that this is correcto. That. And I just did all of this on a single layer, so let's undo it. Let's create our regions. Let's create our input ground. And let's create our output wall. So let's correctly do it now. Regions 6 by 6. Our input ground is going to just be that. Remember to use this specific tile. Make sure you're putting it on the ground layer. So we got this. Our output wall is this corner. So there we go. So we've got one of those corners, and let's just go ahead and save this. Let's see if it happens to work here. Bam. Got that corner. Okay, so let's go back to our corners rule. And I'm going to go ahead and just do one of the outer corners. We're going to do this one right here. And then I'll try to do a fast forward kind of thing to fill in the rest of the corners. So let's go back to our regions. Just view our regions here. Make sure we use the correct trigger tile. Okay. Now this one is a little bit different. This one needs to be a 3 by 3 here, but then fill in the rest here. Okay, so that's what our region is going to look like for these rounded outer corners. So let's see what the input ground is. The ground is the carved out area, and it is just going to be this. So basically on our map, if we've got a section of ground like this, or just anywhere on the map that's that size, it's going to analyze it, and it's going to say if we have carved out ground just here and not in this area, then the wall we're going to output will be this guy. Just make sure that's right. Will be this guy. So recap: region, input ground, the area that's carved out that's searching for, and the wall will output. So let's save this. Let's go to our test map. And let's mess around with this just a little bit. Let's get our floor. And if we're doing a corner like that, let's just go ahead and do this so we can test everything eventually. So let's saved it. So this. Let's see what happens when we hit AutoMap. Okay, so it's still not working perfectly here, but as we can see, I believe this was our corner. There we go. Okay, so let's undo this. And now I will attempt to do the fast forward and fill all of this in. Okay, so just to recap here, regions are input ground, the area that's carved out, are output walls. And to look at them individually, just so you know, you can check along if you're doing this at the same time. This is the regions, these are the input grounds, and this is the walls. So let's save it, and let's test it out. Okay, so it looks pretty good, right? One thing I did notice is, look, we've got two different layers, one called wall and one called walls. And that is because I named this output wall instead of output walls. So let's fix that. Let's go back to here, let's undo it, and run it again. There we go. Now all of the walls are on this single tile, or layer here. So let's say we wanted to make another room for our dungeon. All we would need to do is make a new 32 by 32 pixels. Let's go ahead and name it test map 2. And what would we have to do here? We have to name this ground. We would have to use the same tile set. It has to be based on the same image. And remember, for the walls, we said that we could, for like the high ground, we said we could use any of the light brown. And then make sure we use this tile to carve out the ground. Let's see. There we go. So it's really handy if you're using the same tile set, to create an entire dungeon. You don't have to manually lay that stuff out. You can get, all the corners and everything lined up pretty easily. It does have some limitations, and the limitations are based on your own tile set and how you set it up. Like you can see with this one, the walls are about 4 tiles, like wide or tall, or however you want to say it. So that means if we were to try to carve out the ground, something like this, where they're too close to each other. If we wanted, I want to carve out the ground so it looks like this. Then we auto generate. It's going to be all screwed up because you didn't allow for 8 tiles in between. So if we went back and we moved this guy so there's at least 8 tiles between it. Bam. So as you can see, this is the minimum number that you could have because this bottom, wall ends here and the top one ends just above it. Let's see, I think another limitation was you can't have it too close to the wall here also, since it's 4 wide. It's not even going to trigger if you don't do that. Alright, that concludes the tutorial. Of course, the AutoMap function can be used to do many other things, but this is just one of the examples of a handy thing that it could do. If you have any questions, feel free to post in the comments section. And if you'd like to check out our game, it's called Zealot. It's a 2D action RPG. You can check it out at zealot-game.com. Thanks.